Welcome to The Cow Behind the Barn, a podcast exploring humanity, the world, and the divine as experienced and interpreted by an artist. I'm Kevin Caldwell, a co-founder of the Table Collective. My wife Susan and I live in California. We have daughters and grandchildren in 3 different cities, ranging from the southern to the northern portions of the state. And that means we spend a lot of time on the road together. Susan likes to listen to the podcast as we drive, and each trip usually has us listening to several episodes. Most recently, we listened together to episodes 23, 24, and 25, which explore the nature of human consciousness and the self. At the end of 25, I had said I would explain how I understand human consciousness, my own opinion, which I will. But something in episode 23 changed the approach I was planning to take for how I will go about it. Listening together with Susan gave me the benefit of on-the-spot feedback from a listener, and it was like thinking out loud with her about my own thinking. As I listened, I had a realization. In episode 23, I described an experience I had during meditation in which I found myself extending compassion to our president. And then I went beyond compassion and began to put myself inside his skin, as it were, and I found myself speaking and responding as if I were him. Compassion had transformed into empathy. My realization, in the form of a question, was this, quoting myself: "Is it possible that empathy might be a more fundamental ingredient of human consciousness than I had considered? And if this is so, then might empathy be a more fundamental ingredient of all consciousness than I had considered, including any big C consciousness that there may be? As such, might empathy be a core ingredient, if not the core ingredient, in our quantum entanglement with everything else? In other words, is empathy a core ingredient of the nature of whatever we might call ultimate reality?" For those who've been following this podcast for any length of time, the word entanglement hopefully makes sense. For those who are new, I'm speaking of quantum entanglement here, the theory in quantum physics that subatomic particles influence each other in ways we do not fully understand. And we also impact the behavior of such particles, for example, when we observe them. There is a mutual entanglement. I began to ask if it's possible that empathy results from entanglement. That was a result of my re-listening to episode 23. Turning the idea around, is it possible that empathy is what creates entanglement? Or perhaps it goes both ways. In other words, is the quantum entanglement a subatomic particle version of empathy? And then that led me to ask, is cosmic quantum entanglement a result of some sort of cosmic empathy? And if we consciously cultivate empathy, do we somehow deepen that entanglement? These are all the things that started to swirl around in my mind. Okay, pause here, Kevin. You are leaning way out in front of your skis at this point, and I agree with that. I'm getting way ahead of myself. So let me back up a bit and reset. As I mentioned above, at the end of episode 25, after summarizing different ways that physics, philosophy, religion all look at human consciousness, I said I would use this episode 26, to say what I think. I hadn't suspected the way that my experience of compassion and empathy, described in episode 23, had actually all along been brewing below the surface, subconsciously reframing how I see the nature of consciousness. One way that my approach is being reframed is that so far I've been trying to stay as objective as possible as I describe how physics, philosophy, and religion tell us what consciousness is. And I framed it really as a metaphysical question, just answering, what is it? However, I'm seeing that this question is far more than metaphysical. It is what I would call metapersonal. The last 25 episodes have been a journey, which began when I tried to answer the simple personal question, where and when did I begin? The fact is that cosmos, our vast where, and chronos, which is a word for time, our when, and consciousness, the I in that question, are all woven together. That's become clear all through the episodes. But what is it that weaves them together? Physics answers with quantum entanglement, but I'm coming to suspect that empathy is another way to name what holds everything together. Or, to switch metaphors, I suspect that empathy might be the glue of the cosmos. Now, before going further, let me explain what I mean by empathy. And I decided to ask AI to tell me what empathy is. By the way, that actually seems like a very pregnant action to ask AI about empathy, but I'll leave it there. Here's what AI told me. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person, essentially walking in their shoes. It involves both cognitive understanding of another's perspective and an emotional response to their feelings. True empathy goes beyond simply acknowledging someone's feelings. It involves connecting with them on a deeper level and feeling what they are experiencing. So, 2 observations from that. Empathy is more intensive, more personal, I would say, than compassion. Empathy is connective and inherently collective because empathy connects myself deeply with other selves and collects, as it were, other selves into myself, which is what is behind my question whether empathy might be an experiential expression of entanglement. Entanglement in a psychic and not just cosmic sense. Or perhaps empathy as a way to understand the psychic dimension of cosmic entanglement. I referred to cosmos and chronos, remember time, and consciousness above. So I'm going to use those 3 terms to unpack this further. That's going to require some review from prior episodes, but I'll connect all of that to the current question. So first, cosmos. The theory of quantum entanglement emerged from the observation that the act of measuring the activity of one subatomic particle instantaneously faster than the speed of light influences the state of that particle and also the state of other particles, regardless of the distance between them. It's as if they're communicating, as if they're linked in such a way that they can influence one another. That's the subatomic level, the micro level, we might say, of entanglement. Now, at the macro level, that cosmic entanglement level, this suggests that the micro entanglement extends across vast cosmic scales. Cosmic entanglement suggests that particles were originally entangled in the early universe and remain connected even after the massive expansion of what's called the Big Bang, meaning that entanglement affected and still affects the formation and structure of the entire cosmos. And that means that everything in the cosmos is interconnected in some way. You and I and every other conscious being, every single thing. And here's how I put that way back in episode 2. Places are a combination of things, and things consist of subatomic particles, the qualities of which change when measured and observed, which means that places are changed by the people who live there. Which means that a place is the sum total of the experiences of all the people who've changed that place by being in it and experiencing and observing it. That in turn changes and affects the people living there, which changes how they experience where they are, which changes the places, which again changes the people. That is entanglement, at least relative to our where, the cosmos. That, for me, raises the question whether this entanglement then can be influenced and affected by our intentions. Or maybe I can phrase it this way in very non-physics language. It seems like quantum entanglement describes how particles seek each other out, influence each other across vast distances, and in a very real sense put themselves in each other's places. If particles were conscious, we would be tempted to call that behavior empathetic. And by the way, in prior episodes, I've suggested that every particle of the cosmos either is conscious or participates in consciousness in some way. Hence, empathy may not be an inappropriate term to describe reality at a cosmic level. So that was where. Now, what about when? Chronos. I spent several episodes exploring what physics, philosophy, and religions say about time, about the past and the present and the future. And as a result, here's how I see it. The present, for all practical purposes, is actually never present. The future, by definition, of course, is not here. Now, maybe in quantum physics and philosophy, the present and future can be described as present and real. There are theories that suggest that, and we looked at those in different episodes, but experientially, no. So what does that leave? What is when? And here's why I'm saying that the present is never present. When I try to grab hold of a moment I can call now, what I hold is completely experienced by my memory. Memory is the most pervasive ingredient of consciousness, and therefore of the I. And I'm saying this because you can't, the present moment is so infinitesimally small that it slips immediately into the past, and we're accessing even the present, in this sense, by memory. So memory is, in this sense, a defining element of who we are, of our consciousness. What we experience, even in the present, is whatever our memories store. We can say, in other words, that what we are, in terms of consciousness, is in many ways what we were. And I would add here that when we remember, we're putting ourselves back into the event. Back into the event with the people we experienced it with. Memory, then, operates a lot like empathy, meaning that empathy, putting oneself in the place of other selves, and in this case, other places and other times, is again a primary element with how we engage time. How we engage, how we, quote unquote, engage. So the cosmos, where question, and the chronos, when question, bring us again to the consciousness, I question. However, before I focus on the I want to digress here and insert something of an artistic way of approaching these things. This time it's not a song or really a poem. It's a sort of poetic prose reflection on what I've been trying to express about the self, myself. It began really as a journaling exercise to which I ended up giving a title, Watercolors and Pronouns. So here it is, Watercolors and Pronouns. Griefs pile up and compound as we age, I believe. Mine began early, and for as long as I can recall, re-feel, re-experience, remind. How do I remind if I was not minded to begin with? If I was not mindful, not aware, not attentive? Now in the days when the light that is this life begins to set, daylight fading, moon and stars rising into view, can I say yes to reviewing it all with a compassionate, loving tenderness towards the years, towards the souls whose faces fill the hallways and rooms of all my ages, and towards this self, which is made up of all the memories my imagination paints upon the canvas of my years. Not canvases, plural, because memory is more like painting with watercolor, and the colors of events and faces and voices are always running and blurring on rag paper where any fresh water restarts it all. I am a watercolor mural, and my mural blends somehow with the watercolor murals of each conscious being in my present times, whether they or I are conscious of how our colors run together, run with all the colors of every sentient being and non-sentient being in the same moment, all of which has been touched, handled, imagined, designed, constructed, sold, delivered, purchased, and so the colors run and are imprinted with the colors of all conscious beings, all things. We live in vastly populated, crowded places. Our souls are populated, crowded places. I think of John's Gospel with its mention of an I and a we, a you and a they, all wrapped in union, and of the Gita's selves, and I think of the Buddha's insight that consciousness and experience, mind and matter are all an interconnected, collective, flowing stream. It seems clear that none of us are simply and merely first-person singular, as we seem to assume. Our I is profoundly a we and a they, all at the same time, for every they is in fact a part of the we, which is me. Kevin, pay compassionate attention to the frames in my watercolor mural, for it is ours. I concluded that reflection with pay attention, pay compassionate attention. Were I to edit that today, I would have said empathy. Indeed, in a later journaling session, which included reflecting on this watercolors and pronouns piece, I wrote the following. And I did so largely as a stream of consciousness flow of writing. So there may be some places where it feels like I make some leaps. But from my journal, I wrote this. Compassionate attention? The place of empathy? What if empathy is the way we experience entanglement? What if empathy is in fact the primary knower, the primary nature of consciousness? What if divine empathy is the primary mode of the incarnation and redemption in the Christian model? What if it is the singularity in the Jewish view? What if it's compassion and mercy in the Quran? What if it is big A Atman and little A Atman in the Gita? What if it's the absence of the individual self in Buddhism? What if it's the essence of the respect for all souled things in animism? Empathy is different than compassion, even than love. The latter two can be exercised or experienced as other and from a distance, without deeper identification. But empathy is the essence of union, interconnection, and therefore entanglement. So, I was coming to see, as I shared in that journal reflection, that empathy is the core, the soul of our entangled connection with everything and everyone, and in a very real sense with all times. Walt Whitman was right, in other words, when he said, I contain multitudes. And so do you. This is my way of describing how I understand consciousness, the I of where and when did I begin. Empathy. It's the primary thread in the interwoven tapestry of our entangled, remembering selves. And I suspect that empathy is the fabric holding all things together in the tapestry of the cosmos. And so I suspect that empathy will be at the very core of whatever we might say is the nature of the divine. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. So, back to the question I assigned myself for this episode when I ended the last one. What about that divide? Throughout episodes 23, 24, and 25, I was working with two primary ways of understanding human consciousness, and I lined up various approaches from physics, philosophy, and the religions in terms of how they answered this question. Do we have consciousness, or are we consciousness? Is there a self that is conscious, or is consciousness the self, we might say, itself? That's really just one of the either-or questions that have surfaced, but how would I answer that? Well, I want to just say yes. I'll explain. First, to be fully transparent, I do land on the side of the divide that holds that there is an I that is deeper than consciousness and awareness and the experiences we have, which we normally assume are what makes us us. That's a mysterious I, and in fact, I would say I don't think I can quite define or articulate it. However, at the same time, the reason I say yes to the question, is it this or that, is that I'm aware that at the experiential level, when I see things as they are, what I experience as myself, when I'm really honest with myself, is something very close to the Buddha's description of just a flow of ideas and memories and thoughts and feelings that pass like clouds across the sky. But I want to be quick to add, there is a sky. Which is what? It's that inexplicable, mysterious, elusive unicorn, the self. Well, what are some of the next questions? I think things like this come to mind. Is there more to that sky? Something above the blue that I see? Is there more to myself? By which I mean more than the self that I've already described as entangled with the cosmos and also so therefore entangled with you. Something more than the past my memory connects me with, which is also entangled with everything? Is there something more than my own empathy? In other words, if it's fair to ask whether there's a large S self in addition to a small s self, as we have done several times in the podcast, then it seems fair to ask whether in addition to my small e empathy, there might be a large e empathy. And that's my next question. And yes, that means we're getting to the divine. But first, let me conclude by going back to the fact that this topic is not just about metaphysics. It's personal, metapersonal, which means there's also something very practical about my growing conclusion. Here's something from way back in the first episode that gets at this. I wrote this. In 1962, in a children's book, The Phantom Toll Booth by Norman Juster, a character in the book says, "Whatever we do affects everyone and everything else, if even in the tiniest way. Why, when a housefly flaps its wings, a breeze goes around the world. Each person's inner journey matters to the universe, not just their actions, but intentions, thoughts, wishes. Each person's cultivation of a false self, therefore, of estrangement and pride and half-truths and outright hatred adds to the winds of devastation and destructive force that grow and drive the waves that become the psychic tsunami that wreaks havoc upon humanity and the world. But conversely, each person's journey of progressive cultivation of their true, fully alive self sets loose a breeze that, no matter how tiny, might end up swelling into waves that grow into psychic tsunamis that bring life in all its fullness to humanity and to the world. To put it another way, I'm convinced that the cultivation of our spiritual and creative and relational human essence will enable us to be more alive and aware and awake as human beings, and thus become, if I can say this, better humans. And better humans will mean better humanity, and a better humanity will mean, well, wow, it would mean a lot for every other animal, plant, and species and type of thing we can imagine. That was back in episode 1. And now in episode 26, I see new textures to what I said back then. Now I see the way that empathy might be the very essence of the ability to affect people and places and things and situations. I have a new way to articulate the interconnection of all things, and thus a new way of imagining and enacting things to energize the butterfly effects of goodness and wholeness. And as such, I can't think of a better way to end this than to include, for maybe the third or fourth time in the podcast, my song, Butterfly Wing. They say that all it takes is the wing of just one butterfly to change the course of time. In a broken life, a million miles away, million miles away, million miles away, million miles away. They say that all it takes is just one gentle whispered word, and though it not be heard, it can still do its work. A million miles away, a million miles away,
to our souls and leave bitter stains. Pouring out from inside hearts long shattered. Can my tiny soul do anything that could matter? From a million miles away, a million miles away, a million miles away, a million miles away. They say that all it takes is the wing of just one butterfly to change the course of time. In a broken light, they say that all it takes is just one gentle whispered word, though it not be heard, it can still do its work. A million miles away, a million miles away, a million miles away. Million miles away, million miles away, million miles away, million miles away. They say that all it takes is the wing of just one butterfly.
Well, I'm going to close with another brief section from that very first episode. I am flapping my wings as an act of faith, an act of hope that somehow, somewhere, sometime, someone will feel a breeze that is light and balmy and warm, like the movement of soft sun on skin, the sound of rain on leaves, fresh air, life, and hope. I hope you join me, because we are connected, because it matters, because it makes a difference. So, until next time.